Welcome to 602 Row Show. This is the overnight review show. Um, Mess of a season, mess of a week. We had two episodes this past week. We had both the overnights and the Women Tell All. We already know we're going to have two episodes next week, which will include, honestly, who knows at this point.
Yeah.
So three overnight dates. We're going to try not to talk too much about the Women Tell All in this episode. Some might bleed through. You never know how that might play out. But since the show is mostly focused on Rose League scoring, which does not score the Women Tell All, it should be a minimal part of our discussion today. You'll get a little bit more of the WTA, as the kids say, on the Fantasizer season-long review, which I promise is coming. Ashley has locked up that league. That is now complete. It doesn't matter what happens this last episode, because most of us are working from the same data, and we're all pretty much locked into where we are. So, having said that, we're going to try to keep it a little loose this episode because there's a lot, and there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of discussion back and forth. But what you have up on your screen now is Week 9 picks. Megan, we both went Rachel Gabby, and we had a lot of discussion about how and why Susie could get in your lineup and where that might fit. Susie gave a scare.
I don't know. I never felt threatened by Susie.
I continuously feel threatened by Susie, both from a fantasy standpoint and like on a personal level. She's terrifying.
Yeah.
But Rachel Gabby at the end of the day was the right play.
Yes.
181 points together. I'm gonna go ahead and jump to our scores because there's not a whole lot to talk about when there's only three contestants. So see here, 181. If you slotted Susie in, Susie ended up 25 points shy of Gabby, which feels like a wide margin, but at a lot of times during the episode wasn't that wide. There was a lot going on, interplay, back and forth, sending herself home. It felt like Susie might have been a smart play for a pretty good chunk of her date.
Yeah, and I think one of the conversations that you and I had last week when we were talking about picks is this idea that the producers chose to show a lot of the behind the scenes of like what the other two girls were doing outside of the fantasy suite dates, right? And that's actually where Susie lost a ton of points because she was expressing so much like anxiety and jealousy and like those negative emotions that while, yes, she got a lot of points on her date, there was so much just awkwardness leading up to it. And within those like little like segments of footage that we saw, and so much of that expressed negative affect that like it would have been really hard for her to make it up.
Yeah, she absolutely submarined herself in those in-between segments. When she got on the date, was for the most part able to hold it in check, but she did have 9 of those negative emotions stacked for the most part really early.
Yeah.
So for all the discussion we had, Gabby Rachel was the right play.
Yep.
We had said coming in that this wasn't really a spot where we felt comfortable going anything but the chalk, which again has become more of an abstract term in this season because this season is far from normal. Really, if you had told me Rachel was the top scorer, it wouldn't have surprised me. I know one thing I'll talk about when it comes to Gabby is that the date selection really restricted points to a certain extent.
Yeah,
So we'll get into that a little bit more with the individual girls, but definitely an interesting week from a point standpoint.
it was. But like I think like yeah, I mean I think given the narrative that we've had so far in the season leading up to Fantasy Suites, like Rachel being the top scorer fits with the narrative that we had leading into this episode. And that was something else that you and I had talked about. Um, was that aspect. I think leading into next week, and we'll do a separate picks episode, but um, when we talk about chalk, I think leading into next week, there really isn't chalk at this point. I think it is anyone's game, and you can make a really good argument for any of the three of these girls for that next episode, which, is always fun.
Well, and as Megan alluded to, we're going to break out picks the way we have the last few weeks. We're filming this on Friday. I need more. I need more to make my picks. I have never gone into the last week. Right, we got 2 episodes left. I've never gone into the last week unsure of who to pick, especially with. I'll go ahead and jump us to the next page here. Um, these are the standings for Rosho. There are like 70 points between first and fifth.
Mm-hmm.
You pick one person for the last week. Anyone, realistically, I was looking at it like realistically, top seven, anyone could win
Mm-hmm.
based on who everybody else picks. Now, realistically, out of those 7 people, there's going to be duplicates and picks in there. We're mostly pulling from the same data, but there's not a whole lot of information out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not really sure how this is going to play.
Well, and as we've learned a lot this season, the producers are very much this season, I think more than any other season, leaning into the fact that people are playing fantasy and people like want to know the outcome of this, and are purposefully misleading the viewers.
So I will call out On Cloud Wine has had a phenomenal season. Um, Almost 5 points better than Megan and I. Um, Great job week to week. Really, the top 10 of Rose Show, I believe, all falls in the top 150.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Great job, everybody. Megan, you and I are currently 12th and 10th. And again, same thing plays. We don't know who to pick.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really 3 options you can make an argument for. And we'll get into that a little bit more in our pick show, but there's a lot of movement here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a high probability we both end up top 5. There's a high probability we both end up outside the top 20.
Which I think is super fun.
It's stressful. It's real stressful. But really for Roadshow League, great job everybody. Hell of a season. It's been
Yeah.
a lot of fun here. But make your last pick because you could jump a whole bunch of spots just because someone else picked wrong, and there's not a whole lot of data out there. There's
Yeah.
not a whole lot of information about how this episode is going to play out. So we had a lot of info from the beginning of the season that might hold true,
Yeah.
might not.
Well, and I mean, like obviously, like there are new reports as to how the season plays out. But even if we know the outcome and what happens, we don't know what the producers and editors are going to choose to show us. And so while you may know who wins, while you may know the sequence of events, you might not know how that looks on screen. And that part is so important when it comes to scoring.
I will tell you, I don't know how iPhones work, but if you have an Android phone, you get news updates. Any
Mm-hmm.
publication that told you 4 weeks ago that Rachel had won, unfollow, block, never go to that website again. It's probably the New York Times. There's a paywall anyway. But what this season has really shown is how much the cottage industry that pops up around Bachelor is full of people who are full of shit. So plug Rose Show right now. The one thing we've done all year is just kind of be straight with you. This is the information we have. This is what we see. But there's a lot of news publications out there that are like, oh, Rachel wins because of look at all this chemistry. Block, delete. Those aren't the news sources you need. To quote a famous person I know, fake news. I can't remember who gave me that quote, but
Yeah, I don't think we're allowed to say their name on this show.
yeah, that's a whole other thing. There was that big old video podcast got pulled down by YouTube for all the nonsense today. But hey, that's a whole different Bachelorette. Okay, the only power that be that we're concerned with is Jesse.
If that.
If
Um,
that is fair.
okay, let's go to big three.
All right, you want to go first or second?
Um, I want to go first.
Ah, if you steal mine, I'm gonna be very upset.
I don't think I will. I don't think I will. Okay, so my favorite thing about the episode is every single time the awkwardness of the girls being together for fantasy suites
So
and having to share a room and us being able to see the awkwardness every single time a girl comes back with bedhead and then being like, how was your date? And then be like, oh, you know, we went to these places and then we had dinner and then um it was nice. Just so good every time.
So I guess I have two things to say about that. When Gabby came back with sex hair, it
Yeah.
was among the best her hair has looked all season. And Susie called her out on that shit, and that was rude.
That was hilarious. I loved it.
The other is that, we don't know how long they make them sit in this room. They're not in there for 36 hours together.
Yeah.
They're in there for what I would assume is a sizable amount of time.
Yeah.
The amount of dead air that we got on camera is
So
masterful artwork. Like
so good.
somewhere Leonardo da Vinci is turning over in his grave because he didn't think of this level of art. Having these girls sit in the same room together, knowing they're all either have or about to or thinking about having sex with the same dude who they're all dating, who they all could be engaged to in like 6 days.
Yeah.
Masterful. Absolutely masterful reality TV. And leaving
Yeah.
that dead space is
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, even for like the viewership, like they could have added some background music to it. They could have done a whole lot of things from an editing perspective. But yeah, I mean, like they took it as it was, and that was perfect.
and my favorite part is that I think it was when Susie finally went to leave. She left to go get ready because it's not their room. It's just the room they're having them all sit in for
No,
filming.
she didn't need to go get ready. She left to like she literally walked out the door and then just leaned against the wall and was taking deep breaths because she was about to start sobbing. Like she didn't leave to get ready because like I think that they're all in the same suite and that's like the living
There's,
room of the
there's
suite.
no
She
way.
just left to like escape the awkwardness because she couldn't take it.
So I guess on the subject of Susie's awkwardness, my favorite part of the episode,
What was your favorite thing?
it was the literal downward spiral that Susie's going on. And I can just imagine them, and she's hyperventilating, as you say, she's like recovering in the hallway. Like, hey, Susie, we need some B roll. Can you walk down this spiral staircase while we film it? And she does. And then they VO it with her emotionally and verbally spiraling to like the darkest place she's been all season. And just the literal downward spiral that we see of Susie is, again, it's art. It's a masterpiece.
100%. And I'll actually okay, I'm gonna jump to surprise because my surprise for the episode relates to that, which is why I'm gonna jump to it. Is my surprise for the episode was the masterful puns that the editors made. Because there's that one of Susie literally saying, I'm spiraling, and her walking down the spiral staircase. There was the explosive connection that Clayton and Rachel had going into a volcano. And then as they're going down into the cavern, Clayton says, I'm just so excited to go deeper into our relationship. Ugh, so good. So good. Life becoming art.
It
Art becoming life.
it is really, the Bachelor's been running for so long,
Mhm.
that at times it almost feels like a parody of itself. And
Yeah.
I know I've had that opinion like consciously before, but where I
Uh-huh.
really saw it was the women tell all that we said we wouldn't talk about, but where they're looking at Jesse's old footage, and it's just like, oh wow, so like now half the things we do are just parroting what used to happen just naturally. But it's
Yeah.
been so long that now it just happens and it has to be manufactured because every single possible permutation of this show has played out. So there's
Mhm.
no more original Bachelors. Now you have to parody things that have happened in the past just to make it feel fresh. And for some reason I can really appreciate that.
Like, or just like things that have happened on other dating shows, right? Like they're bringing in like cues from Flavor Flav and Brett Michaels. I mean, they're bringing in like Joe Millionaire, right? Like they're bringing in like all of the shows, and all of just like the moments they're like, you know, what's gonna boost these ratings? This shtick.
And I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. It's it's different.
At some point, Bachelor like has to start labeling itself like as like a satire. um, because also like when you look at to just like the success rates, right? I mean, like we're still real low. It's like less than 50% for sure. Across both Bachelor and Bachelorette, and then um Bachelor in Paradise. And yeah, at some point it just like has to be like a satire of, you know what? Like this is no longer a dating show. This is just like a show where we throw a bunch of people together and see what happens.
I'm ready for this year. I'm ready for BIP. Everyone's hanging out on the beach, they're getting raunchy, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 and fucking Lana comes up, and we get a little too hot to handle action because I don't think the Bachelor crew could deal with it. But all right, so
Okay. Well,
so we'll roll
what was your
back. I don't
what
wa-
was your
I
surprise?
don't want to go to my surprise yet.
Okay. Well, what was your
I want to
least
be
original?
angry about my least favorite
Okay, being about your
because it
least favorite.
continues to be the manipulation of the episodes. I
Fair.
want a rose ceremony. I want to be able to look at something and from a fantasy standpoint, I want to be able to project what happens.
Yeah, and be done with it,
When we
right?
just
Like
end an
move on.
episode with Clayton walking Susie out, which I
Yeah.
don't think I could have predicted in 100 tries. You and I had talked. We knew beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond a probable doubt, that Susie was going home,
Hmm.
self eliminated. If you had
Hmm.
told me that Clayton would have kind of spun that around and eliminated Susie, which is kind of what happened.
Like kind of, because she didn't technically be. She's not eliminated yet, right? Like
Fair,
he didn't say
fair.
go
So,
home.
so
He just said,
let me save that for kind of my
yeah,
surprise.
yeah. Oh, okay.
But the manipulation of the episodes this season, I
Yes.
feel like more than any other one I cognizantly remember watching, has gone out of its way to not end with rose ceremonies.
Yeah.
It's manufactured drama, which is fine, right? This isn't it's a reality TV show. It's about the drama. But from a
Yeah.
fantasy perspective, which is something I've been doing now for like 8 years, 8 years of fantasy batch, it is so frustrating. And we go back a couple slides. We're really good at this as a group, as a team. The 602 squad is really, really good at this.
Well, and I think part of it too is that this season more than any other season, again, like I've said it so many times on the show, is it has not felt like The Bachelor, right? It has felt like just like a drama show. And I think that that's part of where like that time, like these timeline issues come in, right? Is that like, yeah, the producers are not focused on this being like a dating show. They are focused on let's shove in as much drama and like headline worthy like quotes and things as we can and not focus on the relationships that are being built here, right? Not focus on the reason why all these people are here. I mean, to the point where like Clayton's gotten almost the same amount of screen time as Shanae across the season. Like, it's been fucking ridiculous. Um, and so yeah, so I think that that's part of where that timeline manipulation has come in too, is that like not having the episodes end on a rose ceremony yeah, I mean, it doesn't make it feel like it's a show about dating or it's a show about this.
Well, and ultimately, it's not a show about dating, right? It's a show about views. And so for them to still not even lead their own category, Survivor, right? It's like season 4. An acquaintance of ours who I will not plug because we haven't talked about plugging each other's shows. She just did a fantasy draft for Survivor 42. Um, huge, 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 huge. So the people they had on this draft are they're content creators, but the penetration, like everyone knows Survivor.
Mhm.
I have not seen Survivor, and I feel like an outcast in that. I feel like most people have seen an episode of Survivor,
Yeah,
but you can find 2/3 of the population who haven't seen The Bachelor.
yeah,
And so I appreciate from a social penetration standpoint the shift that they've made from real fantasy to whatever the hell this has been the last 4 seasons or so here. Um, I can appreciate trying to pull in that viewership, but you do so at the cost of the integrity of your product. And I know that that's not
yeah.
something anyone cares about.
Well, and at some point you have to change then, like if that's the direction that you're heading in, at some point you have to change the structure of the show too. And maybe you don't have weekly rose ceremonies, right? Like maybe you completely just like flip the like what like the structure of the show on its head. And you're like, you know what, this is no longer working for us. And instead, like we're just gonna be like a free balling type of thing. Um, yeah.
They should have like a challenge coin, and whoever got like the first impression roast can call for a roast ceremony.
Or can eliminate someone.
Okay, so before I go into my surprise, which I'm sure is going to get some discussion from you, what was your least favorite part of the episode?
Um, so uh, my least favorite episode or my least favorite part of the episode, there were just a lot of things that I yelled about while watching this. But I think I'm going to label my least favorite as the the way in which the producers have shown Clayton. Um, and I guess like the reason why I said that is I think that even within this episode, there was such like a lack of support for him as a person and like a human. And again, like they just make him look really bad, right? And there's a lot out there about, you know, like what happened in this episode and how things went down. And I know that obviously Clayton has expressed like how embarrassed he feels watching it back. And to some extent has apologized and to some extent has taken some responsibility for what was said and done on the show. And so I guess I don't want to, on some level, obviously, like everything that he said and did were things that he said and did, right? But that said, we are also seeing them in isolation without everything else that also happened. And yeah, I mean, like we are all human, we all make mistakes, we all hopefully learn from those mistakes. Um, but I do. I mean, I feel I think more than any other like Bachelor or Bachelorette that I've watched personally, like I feel bad for him. Like I feel truly bad for this guy because this was not the experience that he signed up for. And he is going to be leaving this season being one of the least liked and most trashed bachelors or leads in the show. And that sucks for him. Like that sucks that the producers like weren't behind him and weren't like promoting like his best self. And that's not what America sees. And now he has to kind of live with that. So
So I guess I'll dovetail off that. My surprise was Clayton going off the deep end.
yeah.
Um, it wasn't something we had seen. Now, whether or not it's something we should have seen is a different discussion entirely. But the edit we were given, the footage we were given, the blow up with Susie was kind of out of nowhere.
Well, and I think even what we've been told about Clayton too, right? Like even from like production, like what we were told about him is that like again, production like fell in love with his story and that he was just like this sweet guy. And so again, like for them to choose to show that from him, like we haven't seen a lead be that I think, and I mean I'll label it as like aggressively angry ever, right? Like we've seen it from contestants who are like really upset about the way that things are playing out and like being sent home and things like that. But like, yeah, yeah.
Claire.
I didn't see that one, so I didn't
Okay.
see it, so I
Yeah,
can't speak to
it's
it.
to a
But
lesser extent. It wasn't with the depth of emotion that was there. It was earlier in the season.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We are being fed a very specific edit.
yeah. Like
Um,
watching it was uncomfortable. Like I was sitting in a room of therapists, and like we were uncomfortable watching it because like it's not something that you usually see. Like
I
and
was sitting in a room full of drunks, so we thought it was hilarious.
yeah, no, we were all really uncomfortable with it because like that type of interaction isn't one that you usually see in public,
Yeah.
right? It's one that you see behind closed doors, and like to see it on national TV, like that's icky.
So I guess that's a fair enough transition to go into kind of Clayton as a whole for the episode. We've already touched on a lot of
Yeah.
it. Um, One thing that almost made my least favorite list but didn't was the order of the girls.
Mm-hmm.
So we can assume as fact that both Susie and Clayton had had discussions with the producers
Mm-hmm.
that caused them to position her in that three spot.
Yep.
So obviously didn't make my least favorite because I'm way more mad from a fantasy perspective than like an interpersonal level. But um, I feel like if we get a different order, we get a very different Clayton.
100%. And a different Susie.
Fair. So to kind of manipulate it like that, again, it's about views, right? It's about how many people are watching the show. What's better drama? You know, a guy deciding over three girls he's all similarly interested in, or a guy royally fucking himself over because he fucked the other two girls before his third date.
Yeah.
So,
And and I want to clarify because I think one thing that has really upset me about the part of like the read that Susie has gotten is that for her it was all about the sex. It wasn't just about that, right? It wasn't just that he fucked two other girls. It was that he told both those other girls that he loved them. That was also part of that issue, right? Is that it wasn't just about the sex. It was about the love too. And I think that that is a really important point to make because it comes out next week, right? Like we've seen the previews that like the girls aren't just upset that he's fucked all of them because like that's kind of like a given in the show. The fact of the matter is they are upset because they all thought that the emotion that he shared with them was special. And so for every single one of them to hear from him, nope, I am in love with you, that is what they are upset about. And so I want to clarify that because like this isn't like a prude issue, right? This isn't like a religion issue. This is like like for Susie, sex and love are the same thing. And that is like what's happening is that it's not just the physical.
well, and to a similar extent, we saw Gabby with some very, I'll call them progressive and healthy opinions on sexual relationships. And then
Yeah,
in the previews, we've seen her just like breaking down, and it's a lot of what you're talking about. So,
right. And again, I think more and more it's becoming that, right? That like people, both men and women, can have casual sex, right? That casual sex isn't something to be demonized. It's not something that is a problem, especially when you are dating, right? When you are still open to other relationships, right? And you haven't had that monogamy conversation yet. But the issue comes in when there's that like emotional connection too, right? Because people assume that as soon as you fall in love with someone, that's where that monogamy comes in, right? That you're no longer going to be sleeping with someone else because you are in love. Like unless you've had a conversation about like an open relationship or something else, right? But then that is a conversation that you would have. But for most people, casual sex is just sex, right? It's just a physical interaction. But you assume that if you are both having casual sex, that those feelings aren't there too.
Well, and
And that's
I said we wouldn't talk about the women till all, but we saw some horrible sex shaming of Cassidy,
yeah, horrible.
for kind of the same situation where it's like, hey, yeah, I'm looking for my person, but in the meantime, girls got needs. Like, there's
Yeah,
nothing wrong
yeah,
with that.
like full support, right? And like again, I think, and you and I talked about this both on camera and off camera, that to some extent, the way in which Bachelor Nation approaches like the Bachelor and Bachelor is very antiquated. Like it's not representative of dating culture here in the United States at the current moment. Um, and so yeah, to think that someone who's having casual sex isn't ready for marriage, like maybe that's the problematic thought, and not that casual sex is okay before marriage.
If you don't think casual sex is okay, watch The Courtship on NBC.
Yeah, I mean we're gonna watch that anyway, but
All right, so
okay, what general things do you have about the show or Clayton this episode?
not really. We're gonna get into more of it with the girls. We've kind of hit all my top tier stuff.
Okay, I Clayton strikes me just from this episode as being someone who is so naive to love. Like just so naive to like the idea of being like in a relationship with someone. And again, I don't know his dating history. Like I don't know anything about this dude, like how many long-term relationships he's had, if he's had any at all. But I mean like just the way that he talks about it, especially in this episode. And again, I don't know how much of it is to like production trying to like make us feel like he's naive to it. But the idea that he can go into one day feeling like I don't know how I feel about her, and then by the end of the day be like, no, I absolutely love her, is like, okay. And then for him, like after Gabby and Rachel's date, to be like, oh man, I can't believe that I've already told two women that I'm in love with them. It's like, how? Like you were the one who did that. Like you had choice in that. Like you could choose whether or not to say that. So why are you surprised that
Well,
that happened?
Megan, what this is
Uh,
showing me is that you've never been on a date where you went side by side on black sand and slept in a yurt.
I have not. That is 100% true. I think also I found it surprising too that again coming into this episode we had like a an interview with Clayton, right? That they showed us where he said, like, I think I'm falling in love with Rachel, and I think I'm falling in love with Gabby, and I think I'm already in love with Susie. But then, like within his first date, so within his date with Rachel, he ends up saying to her, "I haven't felt these feelings since my last relationship, which was 5 years ago." And it's like, well, dude, you just contradicted yourself, right? Like you literally just told us as a viewership 15 minutes ago that you were in love with Susie, and now you're telling Rachel that you haven't had these feelings since 5 years ago. And so, like, what? And again, like, I think that that's part of like where I think I'm using that word naive. That like he just like is super naive about his feelings, right? Like he's very unaware of what he's doing emotionally, and so it makes him a little bit more impulsive with that.
So what I'll say
I,
is that I doubt there's any future contestants who watch our show, but I know Venko watches every once in a while. So if you go on, keep a journal because I want to be able to cross-reference events with what's actually happening. I need to know if you say something like that in an interview, when was it? What
yeah.
context was it in? Because
Mhm.
my feeling is that most of these people on Bachelor, Bachelorette, fuck it. I'm gonna go way out on a limb because Illinois lost, and I'm feeling kind of frisky. I feel like most people who go on this show are not necessarily the most intelligent human beings.
That's fair.
So I feel like for us to get like the feedback after the fact, it can't necessarily be counted on. So I'd love to
Yeah.
have a journal and say, hey, look, like day 10, this is what happened. These are the things I said on camera. Because we
Mhm.
know as a viewership that they're taking things out of context and they're moving things around. So I would just like to know, yeah. So we had that conversation with Clayton, like you were just talking about. When was it?
Yeah. Mhm.
Because it could have been
Yeah.
week 2.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Well, and I also had this realization too, which is a separate thought, but I had this realization that like as because each of the girls were kind of commenting to him of like, wow, like it's been a week since I've seen you, and the last time I saw you was like with my family, and like, wow, like what an experience. And I realized that Clayton didn't have that experience. Like he got kicked off before hometowns with Michelle, so he like didn't have that same experience that they had, like these women have had in terms of like that emotional buy, right? For him, like to buy into like this guy meeting my family, right? And same thing for him, right? Like he didn't experience Michelle potentially having like increased feelings because she had met his family. And so I think it changes the dynamic too. Like as a bachelor who hasn't had that same experience of sharing family time, like I think that that changes the dynamic.
Well,
And I think that he's a little bit unaware as to how that changes it.
I have to imagine if you take it as like a microcosm of like dating as a whole. Some people date for a very long time, 18 months, 2 years before they meet their significant other's parents, just from flow of
But
life and
it
pacing of
depends on
life.
how but it depends on how important family is to you, right? Like I think that for someone who family is really important, that happens early in a relationship because it has to, right? Because you don't want a relationship if your family doesn't approve,
Well,
right? Or if that person doesn't fit into your family.
so like Rachel's the one that came to mind. She's like, I don't bring anybody home because I'm afraid my dad's gonna, I don't know, drown him in a manatee pond or whatever the hell it was. And like, it seemed that she was pretty genuinely feeling that family was important, but because of her family situation, hadn't gotten to that point.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just it again speaks to what we're given, right?
But Rachel had not only family but friends there too, right? And so friends would have met her significant other before
Yeah,
that, theoretically,
theoretically.
right? That like the people that are most important to you, you do want you theoretically want them to meet significant others early in a relationship because you want to make sure that like you can see this person in your life. Like that's the goal of it, right? Um, and so yeah, like I said, I think it just like because like I was like sitting back and I was trying to like figure out and like looking at all the memes on and all the tweets on like what happened in the show. And I was trying to like approach it from both like Clayton's perspective and then also Susie's perspective, right? Like about like kind of like how they got to this point and like what happened and like the feelings involved and everything else. And like I do think that one of the things that I don't know how much Clayton thought through was what those hometown dates would mean because he didn't experience it himself.
That's fair.
And it does. I think it changes things.
I will say, this season one of the most memeable seasons of all time.
Yeah. Yes.
Pilot Pete season was pretty good, but oof, there's a lot that came out of this one.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
Gabriella.
Yeah.
Uh, so I alluded to it a little bit earlier. I was pissed that they went on a date where she wore a helmet. We were
Yeah.
robbed of so many Gabby points because they couldn't just kiss each other at will.
Yep.
Um, those kiss points in a week where some people had not taken Gabby could have been huge.
Yep.
Um, and we were kind of robbed of them just on circumstance.
Yeah.
Overall, I liked the date. It was very Gabby and Clayton. I don't know if that would be like my overnight date, uh, but they both seem to very much enjoy the time.
Yeah. I thought it was really funny the way they set it up with Gabby saying like, yeah, like I just want to go like whale watching and like drink like champagne and eat strawberries. And then he comes out in this like dirt like four-wheeler. And it's like, nope, that's not the date you're getting. Um, yeah, I always think about like how much input there is into like these dates and like choice and things like that. Um, yeah, I mean, I think um so just based off of what we heard and saw on this episode and thinking through like picks for next week, right? What we heard from Clayton was that he is falling in love with Gabby. He never told Gabby or us as viewers that he's in love with her. And that is the only one of the three that he did not say that to. So, according to what we know right now, he maybe has the least intense feelings towards Gabby out of the three. as far as like moving forward and thinking through picks and things like that. That said, I mean, she very much cares for him. She's very much in love with him. And I think both of them kind of labeled that relationship as being very easy and natural, which again goes a long way too. But to me, I think throughout this entire season, Gabby has felt like a little bit more like a friendship, like just someone that he again can be himself with versus like having that like really intense physical relationship that he also wants. And so so just as far as like bringing it back to fantasy, I think that that's something to keep in mind.
Gun to your head.
Mm-hmm.
Out of these three girls, is
Yeah.
Gabby your bachelorette?
Uh,
For you, not from like a is she the pick? Like is she your bachelorette?
yeah. Yeah. Out of these three, yeah, she is.
She's a lot of fun. She's
She
weird.
is. She's
Mm.
quirky. I think she would be so fun. I think she'd be really funny. And like again, like I really appreciate that she has a ton of like emotional intelligence and is very self-aware. And as you kind of commented on earlier, I love the reframe that she was able to do as far as like that like sexual intimacy and everything. And like I think that she would be a really nice, balanced, regulated bachelorette who's also fun and like gives you some cool
So I'm gonna
things.
call this out. I hadn't picked up on it in the episode, but you were talking about what she wanted her date to be, her overnight date. And it says here on her card that we've been using all year that she is terrified of humpback whales.
That's so funny. Yeah, no, she went for whale watching.
Yeah, number one,
That's really funny.
terrified of humpback whales. And number two, I I feel like Gabby's read a lot of date cards. And number
Yeah.
two says she loves to write cards. I feel like I haven't looked at this
Oh,
splash all season. It's been up on here every single time we've talked about Gabby, but that's her number one and number two.
yeah.
Okay, Rachel, who for my money was the least interesting date. I
Yeah.
really like the idea of a helicopter ride in an exotic land. Exotic's not even the right word. A different land, but
Yeah.
not as the first half of your overnight date, where the second half you spend inside a volcano cave.
Yeah. Well, and I think yeah, I don't know. I think I I've been complaining about it this whole season that I feel like just as with Gabby, I get very much like a really nice friendship vibe like between the two of them. Obviously, like he has the most physical intimacy that we've seen so far, or that we've seen with Rachel. And then like I don't get a lot more past that. Like even like the conversation on their date wasn't all that illuminating. um, so I don't know.
Yeah, I think I've evolved past the point where she's disinteresting. I'm just
Mhm.
not interested.
Yeah.
There's just not a whole lot of depth to her. Again, the edit, right? In the off chance that one of the 30 people that watch our show is a friend of Rachel's, we don't know. We don't know the real Rachel, but the Rachel we've been given is just not interesting.
Yeah, it means like she has really great lips, is what I take away from it. Um, I will say again, like people have really like leaned into Susie being like this like prude who like right like doesn't want him having sex with multiple people. But I want to point out that Rachel actually said like within the context of all of this fantasy suite stuff, that she would question and would most likely not do the fantasy suite with Clayton if he didn't talk to her about how he was feeling about her and if those feelings felt like as intense as hers. And so again, like that's where like that piece about love comes in, right? Is that if he hadn't told her that he was falling in love with her, they might not have had that overnight time. And that's super important in the context of everything that we're about to see, but also in the context of Susie, because Susie wasn't the only one to have this opinion, right? That I want to make sure that he cares the same for me if we're having sex, right? And that the relationship means something like that. Like that's what that means, right? Is that I want to know that I'm special. Like I want to know that he feels more intense for me than maybe other people before I have sex with him. And that was basically the messaging that he gave her in saying that. I also, and again, this kind of goes back to your point of like, we don't know when timeline things happen, but from not interviews, from the two of them talking, right? He went from telling her, I'm falling in love with you in the cave, to then after they've had sex, saying, I'm in love with you. Which I think for me is just funny timing. I don't
When
know.
it's good, it's good. I don't know.
Well, it was funny because so so again, me watching with a bunch of girls here, Rachel ends up saying like it was or no, I think Clayton said like, oh yeah, it was a near perfect night, and all of us go, he didn't make her come. So anyway, Rachel, I hope you
We
came, but
we
you
had a
know,
very similar conversation, but if you're a close friend of 602, we were saying Clayton didn't come.
and
All right. So
I would imagine he actually came real fast
all
because it's
right.
been like weeks
All
and weeks and
right.
weeks for him.
So Susie,
Yeah.
who I know we're going to talk a little bit about, so I'll get my nonsense out of the way first. When she has the second shittiest date of the week, and the wind is blowing
Yeah.
10,000 miles an hour, she's
Yeah.
running up to Clayton. He says, "Do the jump." She goes, "No,"
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
doesn't,
I
and
loved
then
it.
doesn't. I lost it at that point because
I loved it.
depending on your league, right? So some of the leagues we play in, those leg wrap hugs are worth big points, and they stack with
Yeah.
kisses. So for Susie to outright reject his offer for her to jump into his arms was number one hilarious, and number two really rude from a point standpoint.
But it was also like so fucking cold and windy. That was also like when they jumped into like the cold pool and he's like having like a fun time in the pool and she's like, let's go. Like that's how I would be too. Like get the fuck out of here. Let's go to the hot place. Like this is fucking cold.
It's about recovery. It's about recovering your body.
Yeah, no, she wasn't into it.
Not a bad date overall. I don't know if
Yeah.
Iceland was the right place for it, quite frankly. But especially compared to the other two, probably the best daytime portion date. You get skin time, you get one-on-one time without a pilot listening in. You're not wearing a
It
helmet,
was like it was like the most physical chemistry that we've seen them have all season.
and they seemed
And again, like
to kind of
yeah,
well. So I won't say Clayton put his shit aside because I think we kind of know where he was at mentally, but she seemed to put her shit aside and
yeah,
enjoy that daytime time. Like I said,
yeah,
she had a couple comments here and there about not wanting to be in the frigid cold in frigid cold Iceland, but I think that's understandable.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would have
Yeah.
liked to have seen more of the nighttime portion. I'd like to see how long they talked before things devolved. Because their connection more than anybody else seemed, I guess the word I'll use is like cerebral. Like they had it wasn't like an emotional connection, but it was like very much like a mental connection. So I would have liked
Yeah.
to have seen more of that conversation before it turned into what it turned
Well, and
into.
again, it was also she was the only girl that he was in love with before Fantasy Suites, right? Before this date. He was already saying that he was in love with her. I think, yeah, I mean, like the night devolved very quickly. I think that obviously like we could have like an entire show just like processing what happened in those last like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's gonna be called after the final rose. I think that's what that's gonna be.
yeah, I mean like
Down.
yeah, I mean I like I said, I my takeaway from it in a lot of ways is one, um, Susie, I think, was like rightfully surprised at the amount of emotion that Clayton was willing to share with her. And then I think also like rightfully like asked, like, are you sharing these same feelings with other people? Right? Like, is this special or like is it not? And then for her to get upset about that, I think makes sense to me. And yes, for her that is tied to sex. And so those things like come together. Um, I think what I heard from her is that yeah, like because of some of his choices, she didn't know if she'd be ready for an engagement next week. But she wasn't saying I'm done with you, right? She was saying like we need to talk about this and like this needs to be a conversation and like she wasn't saying like I like send me home or like I'm like she didn't self eliminate, right? Like, she didn't self eliminate. She wanted to have a conversation with
Yeah.
him. She wanted to be able to talk it out and like talk about those things. And like I would have and like I think that the best outcome for everything that happened would have been them going to the fantasy suite and having 7 8 hours without cameras to actually talk about what happened and to like process through it and like get back on the same page. Like that would have been best
So
outcome for them, not for
I'm
TV.
gonna try not to get bogged down in this,
Yeah,
but at the beginning of the conversation, before it went to shit, that's what Clayton was asking for
yeah.
explicitly. He's like, "Well, let's spend the night having this
Mhm.
conversation." And
And she didn't say no to that.
yeah, and I don't even think she was opposed to it. I think she
No,
was
I don't think so
unable
either.
to articulate in the moment where she was standing. And when she was unable
Well,
to articulate that, that's when Clayton just
yeah, yeah. He saw red, and he went from 0 to 100, and then there was no reasoning with him. And then I think even up until he opened up the car door for her, she would have gone to have that conversation with him. He was the one that shut it down. Like he was the one that said like, nope, we're done. And again, it's because he wasn't able to see her perspective. Like, and that's the hard part is because Susie was able to like take a step back and like see the both perspectives, and that's why she was willing to have that conversation. He was not able to do that. And again, like that takes learning and practice. And like I get from his perspective that it would have been really surprising and overwhelming. But at the same time, like that's something that you need to be able to do as an adult, right? Like you need to be able to manage those feelings. And like have some self-regulation and like if you want to be like in a functional relationship, like you have to be able to communicate. And like he wasn't able to do that in the moment. Which sucks. And maybe we'll see it like in future episodes, right? Like maybe that's where we're going to is like after he's had a break, like they're able to. Um, One of the things that I think was a huge red flag for me, though, in terms of how Clayton decided to handle this, is that again, he went from being in love with Susie and saying, I love you, to by the end of that argument saying, I loved you, as if his love was that easily taken away. And I get that he was saying things like out of anger and out of frustration, out of his own hurt. But again, like that is such like a powerful switch that I think was probably really scary for Susie to hear that love could so easily be taken away.
the one thing that I try to keep in mind is this is such a compressed timeline. So
Yeah.
you're going from a guy dating 8 other girls to 2 weeks later having a meet your family.
Yeah.
So for me, going the other way so quickly,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of fits the bill, right? Because you're developing these feelings in a vacuum. So
Yes and
I
no.
haven't
Like,
been there, right? So I'm
well,
willing to allow for the fact that it
yeah.
could be real, right? Whatever real means to whoever it is. But that
Yeah.
backslide can happen just as quickly.
I think though, and I guess like maybe it depends on your definition of love, right? But I think most people would agree if you've ever had your heart broken, regardless of whether it's your fault or the other person's fault, that love remains, right? That you don't go from loving someone, like really loving them, to not to having no love for them whatsoever that quickly, right? That it takes time to like heal that heartbreak and like you do still love someone even if they've hurt you, even if they've rejected you. Like you do still have even if they like abuse you, right? Like you still have love for someone. And so like I said, like that was just like such strong language. And again, like I know that he was hurt and I know that there were so many other things going on, but um I don't know, like for me, that was like a really striking comment that I heard from him. That, yeah, I don't know.
So to roll back to fantasy,
Mm,
again, we're not going to do our picks right now in this episode. We're still very much up in the air. But one thing we do know is that almost all major games
mm,
have Susie as a potential for next week. And at least some of that is based on information that we've had since the beginning of the season. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I hope if you're watching our show, you've seen the previews for next week. Um,
yeah,
it is pretty much guaranteed to be a shit show. The
yeah.
real question is, which way does that fall? So,
Mhm.
to maybe give us some insight, I know the whole fantasy world has been turned on its head. Um, but as a little bit of a look ahead, do you want to kind of recap where we're at right now?
Yeah, so I mean, like where we're at, these three girls are, he is falling in love with Gabby. He is in love with Rachel. And I would argue he is in love with Susie.
So,
And that's kind of where we ended.
if we're trying to maximize points for an unknown episode next week, who might be, say, the makeout queens?
Well, Rachel had an astounding 19 kisses in this one
Yeah, she did
episode,
work.
which I mean, like tracks with her season, right? It tracks with like the interactions that we've seen between the two of them. So she jumped ahead of Susie, came in with 47, and then Susie and Gabby both, chipped away, got like a handful. As far as the negative emotions, so obviously this episode really highlighted negative emotions from Susie. She ended up having 9 instances of negative emotions, which is part of where that like point minus points came in, and it kind of chipped away at the number of points that she had in this episode. Um, Rachel and Gabby really didn't have any. So Rachel had 2, and then Gabby had 0. That said, given previews that we're about to see, I would anticipate seeing more of that from both of them. However, I mean, I think just given what we've seen so far from Gabby in particular and the way in which she's able to reframe things, I would I would put another Malort shot on the fact that out of these three girls, next episode, Gabby has the least number of negative emotions as far as like jealousy and anxiety. Because I think she look at this reaction from him. My guess is that she is not going to internalize what happened and instead is going to put it on him.
Out of the three,
Out of
I'll
the
take
three,
it.
Susie
I'll take
included,
it.
yeah. Out of the three, I think next episode, Susie, Rachel, Gabby, I think just from that episode alone, Gabby's in third place for negative emotions.
I
Again,
will
jealousy,
take I will
anxiety.
take that bet. I
Okay.
am banking on a complete breakdown from Gabby. I need 5 swears out of her. I need her to be a disaster.
I think you're going to get the swears, but I don't think you're going to get the anxiety and the jealousy. I think she comes at it, and this is even in like some of the previews that we've already seen, right? Is how can I trust anything you say, right? It is it's her forcing him to take responsibility for it, not internalizing it and say, oh, woe is me, like I'm not enough, I'm broken.
See, and
Because
that's
she's
what
not.
I'm banking on. I'm banking on if Susie gets any screen time at all, it's all
Mm-hmm.
negative points.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll take that one.
Okay.
I'm gonna be 3-0 on my props, so I have some room to spare here.
And I'm 0-3, so we're doing great. Drop a comment if you want to jump in on this bet. Okay, so
That might be our
then
first TikTok clickable clip that we
there we
have.
go. Yeah. So for crying then, Susie jumped ahead, got so many points for crying this episode. Again, I suspect that next episode we're going to see a lot more crying from Gabby and Rachel. And then for instances of love, so even though Clayton expressed so much love on this episode, the girls did not. So Gabby and Susie did not once that we saw tell Clayton that they were in love with him or falling in love with him. Rachel said it twice, but again, like it was very one-sided. It was all Clayton with all the feelings and not so much the girls this episode.
So
Yeah.
we have a double episode next week that, in theory, ends the season. We have some combination of 3-2 final rose ceremony. After the final rose, whatever the hell happens after the final rose.
Yeah.
Make sure you are checking your scoring system. Make sure you're checking your lineup availability. Some sites are still allowing 2 different lineups for Monday, Tuesday. Those should be drastically different. If your league allows that, you should not have the same lineup for those 2 nights. If you're in the kind of league that's a one night thing, up to and including the Rose League, may God have mercy on your soul. We will be back at some point with a picks episode. Gun to my head, look for that like midday Monday because we have nothing. We have no new data. We can lean on the old data that we have.
I do. I have my pick right now. I'm not going to tell you, but I have my pick already. It's set. So we'll see if I change it.
I had Rachel locked in
Mm-hmm.
and have since retracted it. I don't know. In batch bracket, I'm rolling Rachel. Just because a deeper dive on the points, I was willing to risk it there. Because we're not officially covering batch bracket this season. But we will be here at some point with a picks episode for week 10. The last week episodes, whatever you want to call these. Fantasizers tied us all done. There's still points to come, obviously, but Ashley has won that. I came in second. Megan came in third. Those are locked. All the way down to the bottom of season long is locked. So whatever position you're in, that's it. No one else is moving. So good year there for everybody. We will do a season long review. We will do a Rose Show focused year long review. We will also do kind of like a high end fantasy recap for some of the smaller games people might play. And then we're on the Bachelorette. Bachelorette's supposed to start filming in like a week.
Yeah. Well, we have our bets
We do have
episode
our bets
where
episode.
one or both of us will be taking shots of Malort.
So, it's been an interesting season. From a fantasy standpoint, it's been a pretty clean season. We've done really well this year. Stay tuned to see if either one of us finishes in the top 10. Obviously, number 1 is the goal. Seems outside likelihood at this point, but you never know. Join the Rose League in the app. It's the easiest way to play Fantasy Patch, and I don't even get paid to say that. We should. But honestly, as a player, it's the best way to play. Super easy live scoring. If you've played any other fantasy games, that's the way to play. 602 Rose Show on that app. We're like third from the top. The more you join, the closer we get to the top. Fantasizer season long, which is way too late to join now. But get signed up because there's more seasons coming. They also do other fantasy games. So if you're a Survivor kind of person, I'm sure they have Survivor leagues. I have not looked into that because I do not have time. Baseball's back. But most importantly, Club 602 on YouTube. Like and subscribe. You can subscribe to just this playlist if things like shit talking, bad sports takes, and video games aren't really your thing. I'd appreciate you subscribing to the whole channel, but you can subscribe to just this playlist to get only Bachelor stuff. We have a couple shows in the works that should be launching, fingers crossed, before the Bachelorette season. Someone is holding up the train on editing a couple, and then we have some new content providers getting ready to slot in. We're just trying to be the conglomerate, you know. We're trying to do a little bit of everything. But I know we appreciate you all watching the Rose Show. It is a project of frustration at times with these girls who don't know what they want, and Clayton. But Megan, do you have anything else to add for today?
No, just like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Thanks for joining us on another 602 Rose Show, guys, and we will see you for a pick show at some point before the double episode Monday, Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in.